Back in the 70s, one of the most disturbing and unethical experiments to ever take place on humans was conducted. It was so unethical, in fact, that they had to stop the 2-week study after only 6 days. Hey humans, it's Hannah. Welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, I do videos on creepy and disturbing things. So if that's also your thing, consider subscribing. From August 14th to August 20th, 1971 at Stanford University in California, one of the psychology professors there, named Philip Zimbardo, wanted to see how power structures would affect human behavior. And so he came up with the Stanford Prison Experiment. Zimbardo led the experiment and took on the role as superintendent of the prison. He got volunteer college students to participate as the prisoners and the guards, offering them about $15 a day, which in today's money would be approximately $100 a day. Most of the participants were white and middle class, and all of them were men. They were also clear of all medical issues, mental illnesses, and any criminal backgrounds. Zimbardo was the one who decided who of the participants would be a guard and who would be a prisoner by flipping a coin. So participants were randomly given their assigned roles and the experiment was set to begin. A day before the experiment started, Zimbardo had a meeting with all of the guards. They were instructed not to physically harm any of the prisoners. However, they were encouraged to mess with them a lot psychologically. They were told to make them feel powerless. It was okay to give them a sense of boredom, a sense of fear, and to take away any sense of individuality, which to me should have been a red flag right there. So then on the first day of the study, all the prisoners were unexpectedly arrested from their homes in order to make it as realistic as possible. They had a real police department help them in the study to really arrest these college students, and then they were taken to the police station where mugshots and fingerprints were taken. They were then transferred to the mock prison, which was a basement in Stanford Psychology building. They were stripped naked and searched and then deloused, which means they were sprayed with something in order to clear them of parasites and lice as they were brought into the prison. So this already gave them a sense of humiliation and dehumanization. They were then given a gown to wear without any undergarments, and it had their prisoner number sewn onto the gown. They were given a nylon cap, which they were supposed to wear on their head, and they did this instead of shaving their heads, as they sometimes do in real prisons. They also got a chain on their ankle in order to symbolize their loss of freedom. Zimbardo would also refer to their gowns as a dress in order to make them feel emasculated and like they're wearing women's clothing, because 1970s. Each prisoner received a cell with a cot in it. They had to stay in their cell or in the prison yard 24 hours a day. So guards, on the other hand, were given a uniform, they were given sunglasses so that the prisoners could not make eye contact with them, and a baton in order to just assert the fact that they were more powerful than the prisoners, even though they couldn't use the baton on the prisoners. The guards got nicer areas to hang out and relax in, and they were also allowed to leave the prison at the end of their shift. The guards had to call the prisoners by their numbers instead of their name in order to make them feel less individualized. Prisoners were frequently woken in the middle of the night, sometimes 2:30 in the morning, for quote-unquote counts. This was so that the prisoners would become familiar with their numbers and for the guards to, of course, exert more control and take away more of their individuality. Other than all that weirdness, the first day went relatively well. Nothing of substance really happened. So imagine the guards' surprise when they come in for their morning shift on day 2 and everything has gone to hell. Prisoners on day 2 basically started rioting against the guards. They ripped off the numbers off their gowns, they took off their nylon caps, and then they barricaded themselves in their cell by pushing their mattresses against the doors. One of the leaders of this said rebellion was prisoner 8612, and he was placed in solitary confinement as punishment, and this was an empty closet really close to the cells in the prison. One of the other leaders of this rebellion had his ankles tied together. As for the rest of them, the guards took all their mattresses and they sprayed into their cells with fire extinguishers. And since they weren't allowed to physically harm the prisoners, the guards started messing with them psychologically, just as they were instructed to do. First, they set up a privileged cell in which they took the prisoners that were not rebelling against the guards and they were given special treatment. They got their mattresses returned to them, they got special meals, and they were able to wash themselves more. They were basically trying to break the solidarity between the prisoners. But these privileged prisoners actually refused to eat the special meal given to them by the guards. And the leader, prisoner 8 8612 actually refused to come out of solitary confinement until all the mattresses were returned. Those weren't all the punishment that were enforced by the guards. The prisoners were forced to go to the bathroom in buckets in their cells, and they were often not allowed to empty them, sometimes not until morning, other times not at all. So the sanitary conditions of the prison diminished very quickly. And while the guards never hit any of the prisoners, they still did start some sort of physical punishment. They'd make them do endless push-ups and sit-ups and things like that. Prisoner 8612, the guy that was the rebellion leader, actually ended up leaving the study 36 hours after it started. At first, he just asked to leave, but he was severely scrutinized for it. Zimbardo actually asked him if he would stay and that he would stop giving him any punishment by the guards, but that he had to be a snitch in exchange and give them information on the other prisoners. This rebellion leader, prisoner 8612, of course didn't take him up on the offer. He returned to the other prisoners and then told them that nobody was allowed to leave, even if they asked to leave. Originally, they told that they were allowed to leave if they wanted to, and so of course this caused more panic amongst the prisoners, and it started giving them more of a sense of hopelessness and helplessness. Zimbardo had said that the only reason a prisoner would be allowed to leave is if they were in dire need of medical care or psychological care. So 8612 started playing the crazy person. It got really real and he went into a total rage.
Doctor, anything. I mean, Jesus Christ, I'm burning up inside, don't you know? I can't say that. I'm f***ed up. I don't know how to explain it. I'm all f***ed up inside. I want out! I want out now!
And so they were forced to release him, again, only 36 hours after the experiment started. When they interviewed 8612 later, he said that he did this on purpose, that it wasn't that he was really going crazy, but he was willing to do anything to get out of the situation. So he made up his mental instability in order to be released. Day 3 was visitor day, and they were going to allow all their families to visit the prisoners in the prison. Well, this part almost made me more mad than anything else in this study. Zimbardo totally covered up what was going on in the prison. They cleaned the prison out completely. They fed all the prisoners a really good meal. And then they warned the prisoners that if they complained to their visitors, they were going to have their visits cut short. Zimbardo said himself that he didn't want all the families to be concerned about the living conditions the prisoners were in. But this to me just shows that they know that what they were doing was wrong from the very beginning. They knew it was unethical, because why would they have to cover it up for the families if it wasn't unethical? And the audio of him discussing this is actually pretty creepy.
We were worried that once the parents saw the condition of our jail, they would want to take their sons home. We decided to manipulate both the prisoners and the visitors to preserve our institution.
So day 3 passes, and then Zimbardo is tipped off about a rumor that prisoner 8612, the one that pretended to be insane in order to get released, he heard a rumor that prisoner 8612 was going to come back in the middle of the night with all of his friends and help release all the other prisoners. Zimbardo was also becoming very engrossed and into his role at this point. So how he reacted, he moved all the prisoners upstairs into a storage room and then cleared out the prison down below in the basement completely. Zimbardo sat in that basement all night waiting for 8612 to come. His plan was to tell 8612 that they ended the experiment early and that everybody went home safe and sound, even though that wasn't the case. And then his plan was to put all the prisoners back in the basement in the morning after 8612 would be under the impression that they were free. In one of the audio clips, Zimbardo even discusses trying to manipulate 8612 into coming back, imprisoning him and telling him that he was actually released under false parole pretenses. And again, it's disturbing when he talks about it.
We even discussed luring 8612 back and then imprisoning him because he had been paroled under false pretenses.
Luckily, 8612 never showed up. And so they had to put the prison back up in the basement, and the guards were now even more mad that they had to waste so much time with it. So in retaliation, they upped the push-up punishment by making the prisoners sometimes do push-up for hours on end, making them wash the toilets with their bare hands, and then also polishing the guards' shoes. Prisoner 819 started protesting, and in order to prevent another rebellion, they made all the other prisoners chant about how bad this prisoner was and chant over and over about how they were being punished because this prisoner was being bad. 819 ended up quitting the experiment, but it seems like he was actually allowed to go. Prisoner 416 replaced this prisoner who quit. they did have prisoners on standby for this occasion. He also instantly started protesting and rebelling. He almost instantly went on a hunger strike once he was in the prison. They even made all the prisoners write letters home that all said the same thing, and to tell their families about what a great time they were having and how they were not in bad conditions at all. Overall, there seemed to be about 3 types of guards and 3 types of prisoners. For the prisoners, some of them rebelled, some of them just emotionally broke down crying and asked to leave, and then some of them were actually perfect prisoners and did exactly what the guards said and did perfect behavior. For the guards, there was one type of guard that were actually pretty kind and felt really bad for the prisoners and didn't really want to invoke all these punishments. There was a second group that was kind of in between, where they were really big rule followers, but they weren't cruel. They were the tough but fair group. And then there was a third group of about 4 of the guards who seemed straight up sadistic. They seemed to really enjoy giving out all this punishment. The study, like I said before, was planned to end after 2 weeks, but they had to end it after only 6 days. The reason for this was actually Zimbardo's girlfriend, who was going to go and interview the prisoner inmates, but she saw the living conditions and just thought that it was so unethical. She told Zimbardo that he shouldn't continue. Zimbardo claimed that at least 50 people saw his experiment while it was happening, and she was the only one that said it was probably unethical. I have a really hard time believing this though, considering when the families came to visit, they were totally covering everything up and making it seem like everything was just fine and dandy. About 2 months later, they interviewed some of the participants. One of the guards interviewed 2 months later said that he actually had no idea that he was capable of such behavior. He didn't realize while he was doing it that it was so wrong. He was just almost in a daze, I think, and then he didn't realize until after it was over, where his behavior really sunk in and he started to feel guilty for what he had done. They all say that they really started to internalize their roles and really became the roles, forgetting that they were actually just normal people. Another guard that was reflecting on his experiment a couple months later said that he started conducting experiments of his own within the experiment. He was pushing the boundaries of what he could verbally say to another person before people would start reacting. He said it was actually amazing the things that he could get away with without being reprimanded.
I wanted to see just what kind of verbal abuse that people can take before they start objecting, before they start flashing back.
Which does show that if you're given power without any consequences, you are more likely to act on that power. Zimbardo himself does totally admit that this experiment was unethical. He even believes that the 6 days was too long and it shouldn't have even gone on that long, but he was so engrossed in his role that for some reason it went on for as long as it did. So while this study is really interesting and gives us some insight into human behavior, it's not a real experiment. There was no control group, there was no comparison group, and the sample group itself is extremely small, only about 24 people. So you really can't make any big conclusions with such a flawed study. And then we'll talk about the biggest elephant in the room, bias. The prisoners and the guards, the college students that participated in this study, were told the intention of the study before it started. Zimbardo wanted to see how power structures would affect human behavior, and all the students were aware of that being the purpose of the study. Zimbardo also had a meeting the day before the experiment started with all the guards. He tasked the guards with dehumanizing the prisoners and taking power over them. So because this expectation was put on the guards before the study even started, of course they're going to act on it since that's what they were told to do. After the experiment, some of the guards even said that they were more mean to the prisoners on purpose because they thought that that would help the results for the experimenters. In other words, being more mean to the prisoners would make the results of the study more significant. So that kind of takes the merit away from pretty much all the results. They were also pretty much all the same demographic. No background issues. They were all male. They were mostly white and all middle class. So I understand why he would control that variable, but more diversity in the participants would have changed the results drastically. Zimbardo said himself that the purpose wasn't to show that guards and prisoners always acted this way in a real prison, but, and I quote, "Rather, the Stanford Prison Experiment serves as a cautionary tale of what might happen to any of us if we underestimate the extent to which the power of social rules and external pressures can influence our actions. Which I do agree is interesting if we think of this in terms of the Holocaust, real prisons, or as we're dealing with now, the sometimes brutality of our police force. If given a role and a uniform, and then you're made to believe that you're more powerful and basically superior to other humans just because society says that you are. However, there is a huge flaw, as we kind of already discussed. Zimbardo had a specific result in mind from the start. He wanted to prove something that he already believed to be true. He wanted to prove that if you were given power, it would affect your behavior and you would become basically crazy and evil, even if you're not a crazy and evil person. If somebody already wants a certain result out of a study, then that's going to heavily influence how the participants in the study act. And in this case, it definitely did. And due to the unethical nature of the study as a whole, we can't repeat the study in the exact same way that he did in order to see if we would get different results. They did, however, remake this study in 2001. It was called the BBC Prison Study. And they did remake it, except they made it way more ethical, of course. In the BBC Prison Study, they didn't set the expectation for power of the guards over the prisoners, but rather just instructed the guards that were participating to keep the prison running smoothly. I won't get into the details of that study because that would be an entire other video, but basically the prisoners in the study all started working together and became really close. The guards, on the other hand, didn't. They became disorganized, they weren't really able to work together, and they weren't able to keep the prison really running smoothly or control the prisoners that well. In the Stanford experiment, they were told to act controlling, tough, and powerful, and so they did. But in this study, they weren't given any expectation like that, and so they didn't follow through on it. Overall, I do believe that Zimbardo had good intentions when he started the study. He really wanted to show something real about human psychology, but the problem was that he already had what the results should be in his mind. So the study was basically doomed from the start, which to me, that tells us way more about how far we'll go in order to confirm our already held beliefs than it does about how power and authority affects our behavior. Like all experiments that have been morally questionable in the past, at least it does tell us something about how to properly and ethically conduct experiments and studies in the future. Anyway, please let me know what you think in the comments below. That's going to be it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it to the end, and I will see everybody in the next one.